is what's happened to the gross profit. And I was following a blog conversation a couple weeks ago that essentially said, what's more important, volume or gross? And as I followed the postings on the blog, it became very clear to me that I believe that we still, as an industry, don't really get it. Because there should never be a conversation between volume and gross, at least in the context that this conversation was occurring. And what I mean is that when it comes to traditional used car operational thinking, gross profit, average gross profit has been king. And while average gross profit is important, what I've come to understand is that the pursuit of the almighty high average gross profit as a means to achieve financial success in used car operations is both wrong and it's also killing us. Let me explain what I mean. Why would I possibly say that the pursuit of the almighty average gross profit is the primary means for achieving used car financial success is wrong? Well, I know that to be the case because there once was a day where if your used car department possessed extraordinary talent in used car operations, you could routinely affect a large number of frequent large average profits. You know, what I mean is this: if you possess superior used car acquisition skills, you used to be able to go to an auction and look at a whole yard of cars and identify just a couple out of hundreds, perhaps, that possess no unique special appeal, but because you had a special eye for the car business, you could say, I could make a car out of that one, and that one. And because it wasn't obvious to everyone else at the auction that day, you could often rip those cars out of the auction out significantly below the money if you were a great used car buyer with a real eye for the business. And then further, once you brought those cars back to the dealership, if you were an extraordinary used car reconditioning talent, you could put that plain Jane in the shop and work your magic. When it came out the other side, you had a spectacular car. And then further, if you possess extraordinary used car sales talent, you can encounter a customer on the lot for that car and instantly build rapport and credibility, and you have great negotiating skills and great timing for TO and closing. And if you put all of those skills together historically, you could routinely and frequently extract a lot of money from customers, more money than they needed to pay someone else for the same car. And you know, today I say to you that if you've got all of those talents, that's wonderful. But how often do those talents today amount to an ability where you can get people to pay you more for your car than they need to pay for someone else? So, you know, what I've come to really understand is all the focus and attention in traditional used car operations that we put into the attainment of very high, strong average gross profits is wrong, because the reality is, if you can just recognize it, is that today we don't have the same degree of control over what we sell the cars for or what we are able to buy them for as we once did. And that's not to say that we don't have any. Of course, we still do have some, but not nearly as much as we used to. And quite frankly, not nearly enough control over what we sell them for, what we buy them for, to justify the pursuit of the almighty large average gross profit as the primary means to achieve used car success. And that's why it's wrong. I mean, we just don't have that degree of control anymore to make it the major emphasis. And that's, again, why it's wrong. And more importantly, why is it killing us? It's killing us because used car operators, for the most part, are trying to chase this horse called gross profit, average gross profit. And that horse is so far out of the barn and so far down the road that you're out chasing that horse, believing that one day you're going to catch it, you're going to wrangle it, you're going to put it back in the barn, put it in the stall where it once belonged, and by God, you're going to keep that average gross profit once you recapture it back up there where it once was. And as an industry, we're so focused on pursuing that failed strategy of the past that what it's doing is it's preventing us from recognizing what is our true reality. What is the true reality challenging the financial viability of a used car operation today? Most dealerships cannot even recognize, let alone address, because they're still out trying to chase that strategy of getting up their average gross profit. So what is the true reality that challenges every used car operations financial results today? Well, the reality that you all have has two components. The first component you might debate, the second no one will debate. But the first reality that every used car operation faces today is that every day that goes by, it's going to be harder and harder to make as many and as much large average gross profits. I mean, that's just the age that we live in. That's the age of the internet. It's the information age. This has happened to every single industry in the whole world. The information that's available to the consumer today largely takes away from the seller the opportunity to make the margins that they once were able to do in the past. Now, you can deny that. You can choose not to believe it, but I think that would be a mistake. I think the reality is that the world that we live in, information age, is such that consumers have more information, more knowledge than they ever did, and consequently, as sellers, less opportunity for us to make the big fat margin that we did in the past. And that's half of our reality. The second half of our reality, which no one will debate, is that in the face of this new environment where it gets harder every day to make the same number and same amount of large, lucky average gross profits, somebody expects you to make as much or more financial returns in that used car operation as you did the month before or the year before. So there you have it. There's your reality. In an environment that favors you less often in terms of large, lucky average gross profits, and yet the expectation is that you're going to make more and more money from that used car operation. And if that is your reality, and I think most of you would agree that it is, then my question to you is, what is your plan? What is your plan to succeed, to grow, and thrive in the face of that reality? And when I ask that question to groups of dealers, for the most part, the room is very silent. And the reason that the room is silent is that no one has an answer. And the reason no one has an answer is that they're not even thinking about it. They're still believing that the way to achieve used car financial viability is to get those gross profits back up to where they once were. And again, that just can't be the answer in today's environment. That's like pushing on a rock that just isn't going to move or not move enough to be viable. So if you're willing to recognize and you're willing to address the reality of making fewer large average gross profits every single day, and yet in the face of expectations of higher financial returns, you have to have a plan. And when I push a crowd hard to give me their plan, the answer that I most often get is volume. And if you're thinking volume's got to be the answer, I would say that you're in the right neighborhood, but you're not there, because we all know dealers that have lost a lot of money on volume strategies, have even gone out of business on volume strategies. There's only one strategy for financial viable success in this highly compressed margin environment that we're dealing with, and if anyone else has a better idea, I'm all ears to it, but the only one that I've come to understand to be viable is the strategy of velocity. So what is the strategy of velocity and how is it different than volume? Well, it begins with a shift in our focus away from the attainment of large average gross profits on used cars to large total gross profit in our used car department. It shifts the focus from average gross profit to total gross profit. But it also requires mastery of new tools of measurement for used car decision making. You see, the three primary decisions that we have to make as used car operators every day are what cars, what money we pay for them, and what price. And the three new tools of velocity management that must be mastered are, number one, market day supply, number two, price to market, and number three, cost to market. Very quickly, market day supply is a numeric expression that combines the supply of a particular vehicle in the market against its demand. And I would suggest to you that what has happened in our market over the last 3 to 5 years as a result of the internet is that it's become very efficient, very rational due to its transparency. And the time-tested knowledge that we have of rational markets tells us that supply, demand, and price sensitivity are governing factors. So in order for you really to know best today about what cars you want to put on that lot, how much you should be willing to stretch to buy them, and how proud you should be when you go to price them, not the only, but one of the key, and perhaps the single most relevant factor to know is what is the supply and the demand of that vehicle in your market that moment. Because that single piece of information holds more knowledge for you about what you care about ultimately, and that's how fast that car is likely to sell and how easily it is to make gross, than any other single factor. So market day supply has got to be in the forefront of our consciousness when we make any one of those three decisions. The second is the price to market. The price to market is a simple measurement that says how our vehicle is priced against the identically equipped competing vehicles in the market. And you know, here the answer of pricing vehicles is not to price them all high when they're fresh in your inventory, nor is it to price them all low. The art of proper pricing today is to know which cars in your inventory can and should be priced high, and if you have to drop them, you drop them very slowly, and which vehicles on day one you better be prepared to price in the basement and revisit those prices very, very frequently. So how is it that you're supposed to know which cars are which? Well, I would suggest to you that it's a very simple two-step process. The first step is one that dealers and managers typically have already mastered, and that is the ability to look at a vehicle and very quickly, perhaps in less than a minute, understand the emotional gravity, the physical appeal of that vehicle as merchandise. Because no matter what the internet does, there's always going to be an emotional component to purchasing a vehicle. So if you look at a vehicle with your car guy or car gal eyes and you say, wow, you know, that's really a hot car, that's a car that meets the first half of the test in terms of putting it up high. But if it's, on the other hand, just an ordinary car of ordinary appeal or less, you know, that's the first step that tells you that maybe you ought not to be so proud of this vehicle in spite of the fact that it might be fresh in your inventory. But after you've taken the emotional temperature of the car, as I refer to it, then the second necessary step is for you to be able to look at that car not as merchandise, but as an investment, because in fact that's what it is. It is an investment operating in a highly liquid, highly transparent, dynamic environment. So how do you most properly measure or assess the worthiness of an investment as a merchant for any item you wish to sell in an efficient market in terms of how fast it's likely to sell and how easily it is to make gross? Well, it's most rationally done through the assessment of its supply and its demand. So in other words, if you take a step back and think about the two steps that I just described, if you look at a car with your car eyes and you say, wow, that one is really a special car, and that particular car happens to have high demand and low supply, then that's a car that you put up high for the first 30 days, and if you drop it very gradually. But on the other hand, please help me understand or defend the notion the way that most dealers do it today. Well, they'll look at any car. It's just a car, no special appeal, and that particular car happens to have high supply and low demand, and just because it's fresh in that dealer's inventory, they'll put it up there high for the first 30 days. And I say you can't do that anymore. You have to be better at that. You have to be able to look at these cars, as I said, both as merchandise, because it still is a merchandising business, but you also have to look at it as a financial investment, because that's what it is. And you have to have one foot on two sides of a line when you make that critical pricing decision. And then the third key metric of managed velocity management is the cost to market. And this one is very important, and it's very unintuitive to most car operators. And the cost to market refers to the heightened need today for you as used car operators to be extremely concerned about and extremely active and involved in managing the equity of your inventory. Now, why would I possibly stress to you today the importance of managing the equity of your inventory? Well, as we all can feel it, we're operating in a highly compressed margin environment. Never can I remember the spread between what we have to pay for these cars and what we can sell them for into the market being smaller than it is today. And we all understand, or at least we should understand, that today, in order to have anyone to talk to, we have to price a car reasonably. And if you price a car reasonably, you have to begin to worry or be concerned about having enough left over when the transaction is finished to pay the bills. And consequently, you have to be super heightened concerned about how right you own these cars, and not just measure it from month to month, but I would say to you from week to week. you have to be concerned from 1 week to another whether the equity of your inventory rises or falls tiny percentages. Why would that be the case? Because the first universal law that governs how fast the car will sell and how easily it will make gross is how right you own it. We all know that who have operated used car operations. A car you own right will typically, generally, sell faster and make gross easier than a car you own wrong. So is that concept any different when you put a bunch of cars together and you call it inventory? No, it's no different at all. So whether you recognize it or not, if the equity in your inventory from last week to this week falls ever so slightly, like a point or a point and a half, or God forbid 2 points from 1 week to the next, whether you recognize it or not, that drop in equity of your inventory will in fact affect your ability to generate gross profit in the coming 4 to 6 weeks with that inventory. So what I offer you is the third metric of velocity management is what's called cost to market. And cost to market is a slightly different way of measuring equity in your inventory from that which we always used to do, to the extent that we ever did it at all. To the extent that we ever measured equity in the past, what we would do is we'd take our investment in the vehicle or vehicles against their wholesale value. And cost to market takes a slightly different approach. It takes what you're invested in the vehicles for, not against their wholesale value, but against the retail value. Why would I suggest that you use retail versus wholesale? Well, either one is just simply a benchmark. But the problem with wholesale is just an opinion, yours versus mine, until we cash the car. So we might debate the wholesale value of a car and consequently never agree how right or wrong we're in the car. But today, every single one of you has a tool that can properly assess the average retail price of that car in that market, that moment. It's not debatable. We don't have to spend a moment thinking or discussing it. So in other words, if you own a vehicle for $9 grand and its average retail asking price in that market that moment is 10 grand, you divide the 9 by the 10, and you get what we call a 90% cost to market. And very respectfully, I would say to any used car operator today, if you listen to this seminar, if you don't know whether the cost, your inventory's cost to market is 82%, 83, 4, 5, or God forbid 90+%, if you don't know what that number is, then you cannot possibly be managing the equity of your inventory. You are not in possession or control of a critical factor that is necessary to be in place for profitability. And I don't think, there's enough fat in this business left around anymore where we can just assume that if we sell a lot of cars, kick up a lot of dust, when it all settles, we'll make money. You just can't assume that anymore. You have to be sure that you're going to make money, and at least one of the critical components of that is to measure and manage the equity of your inventory. So you see, these are the critical components to being profitable today. You have to create, maintain conditions that, if in place, will allow you to be favored by this brutal market that we're all dealing in. And you see, although this market today is quite brutal, there's something very beautiful and elegant about it, and that is that it's rational. And when you have a rational market, it's predictable. And when something is predictable, it basically says, if you do this, that will happen. And today, the key to being profitable is to maintain conditions that are right for profitability, and that's having cars on your lot that have the highest possible demand, least supply, priced right. That doesn't mean all high or low, and importantly, owned for the right money. So once again, I don't think that any dealership should be heard rightfully to complain about the lack of profitability of their used car operation until and unless they have these conditions under their control, and the tools of market day supply, price to market, and cost to market are tools to help you create and maintain those conditions. So let's take a look at what this looks like when it's actually in operation. With permission, I'm going to show you a profile of a dealership enterprise called Bill Marsh. They're in northern Michigan, and I believe that they have 4 or 5 stores, and I'm going to show you a look at their inventory rolled up as if it's one big inventory, and you're going to see what velocity management looks like when it's in play. So you see their inventory here broken up into 15-day buckets, and take note of the fact that for the first 15 days, their price to market is 96%, which means that their vehicles are priced on average 4% below the identically equipped competing vehicles in their market. And then after just a short 15 days, it goes down to 93%, which is a 7% advantage. And then after a short 30 days, it's 89%, 11%. Now, I want everyone participating in this seminar to please understand that as little as a 4% discount against identically equipped competing vehicles through the eyes of Internet shopper will cause them to travel hundreds of miles, let alone a 7 or an 11% discount. Dealerships who are willing to price like this will be favored by the Internet with traffic at the expense of their competitors from hundreds and hundreds of miles away. Now, the question that you're probably asking yourself is, how could we make any money if we price cars as aggressively as these guys do? Well, there's a couple critical components to that answer. The first is that I want you to take note of what percentage of their inventory is under 30 days. You see, I think that this is one of the most important vital signs of the health and profitability of any used car operation. What percent of your inventory is under 30 days? Theirs, I believe, is in excess consistently of 70%. So I believe that at a minimum, to have health and prosperity in a used car operation, you have to have at least 50% of your inventory under 30 days. And once again, if you don't have a minimum of 50% under 30 days of age in your inventory, you really should not be heard to complain about lack of profitability, because freshness of inventory is a critical core component to profitability and is one that is exclusively under control of the used car operator, not the market. You'll also notice that their markups in the first bucket are about $2,100, then it goes down to about $1,850, then it's only $675. Again, these are markups, and you know, this doesn't appear to allow for a great deal of profitability, but in fact, this dealership's used car operation is very profitable. But why? Well, as I stated, a large percentage of inventory is fresh, under 30 days old, subject to the higher markups. The average age of their inventory is 22 days, but the way that they make money today is that they turn this inventory 17 times per year. That's about 1.5 times a month. And they're not alone in doing this. Today, there are hundreds, perhaps many hundreds of dealerships, velocity managed dealerships, that are turning inventory, you know, 17 to 18 times a year, 1.5 times a month. And I ask you, who would not trade $200, $300, $400, maybe even $500 of your average gross profit if you could in return take your turn from where it probably is, 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe even 10 to 16, 17, or 18 turns? Because you see, at the end of the day, what you take to the bank is not your average gross profit. What you pay your bills with is not your average gross profit. It's your total gross profit. But you see, here's where the basic problem comes for most dealers. You're all feeling gross margin compression. And the natural reaction of the dealer feeling that sort of compression is to raise their prices, to give themselves more room to negotiate, give themselves more opportunity to have something left over. But in reality, raising your prices is exactly the wrong thing to do. It's like shutting oxygen off to your patient. I mean, if you think that raising your prices in the face of margin compression is the right thing to do, stop and think about it. You're taking your after-tax profit dollars and willingly handing it over to very kind people at Common Auto Trader and say, here, take my money and please message as strongly as you can to my market a message that my competitors' cars are more worthy of consideration than my car. That's what you're doing. Unwittingly, but that's what you're doing when you raise prices. The way today to fight margin compression is not, and I stress not, through raising your prices and putting them on the internet. The way to succeed today and to be profitable is to price your cars right. And again, that doesn't mean all high, doesn't mean all low. It means knowing which ones are which, but finding the sweet spot in your market, like the Marsh Group has and other groups have, that allow that internet to favor you with more than your share of opportunities, and do that at the expense of your competitors. And then once the people get to your showroom, that's when you fight the good battle for gross profit. And I've done a previous seminar, and it's recorded, and it's on, you can link to it from the homepage of vAuto.com. called documentation replacing negotiation. And once the people get to your showroom, that seminar will reveal to you 3 or 4 techniques that cost you no money, that are very practical, that dealers are doing around the country today to preserve their gross profit, but doing it, again, once your people get to the showroom, not trying to fight the good battle for gross profit out on the internet. That's the wrong place to fight it. So the first strategy that I want to share with you today is the recognition that, as counterintuitive as it may seem, in the face of mounting gross profit pressure, to actually remove the focus from obtaining the large, high average gross profit, something that you really, a battle that the marketplace just won't let you win today. Shift your focus to the attainment of the total gross profit. But unfortunately, that takes a bit more skill and discipline than just believing that you're going to do it through volume. You have to do it through a very disciplined approach, the approach that we call velocity, using new tools, new skills, new metrics of market day supply, price to market, and cost to market. Okay, now let's shift our focus to another critical strategy about how to leverage the internet. You see, leveraging the internet, getting more than your fair share of opportunities from it, is much more than just pricing right. It obviously starts there, but it goes far beyond that. So what I want to introduce you to is something that I've come to understand and respect over the past year or so, is being perhaps, not the only, but perhaps the single most powerful thing you can do to change the sales volume and profitability of your operation. And surprisingly, it's one that very few dealers have any notion of. So when it comes to advertising used cars, our industry has always recognized classified advertising as being the preferred medium versus display. And I think it's that way because when somebody goes out to buy a used car, I think the psyche of the shopper is to first find the car they want, then assure themselves that they have the right price on it, versus the new car shopper, I think, really starts out assuming that they can buy the car from any franchise dealer. They start out wanting to know what they should pay. So even before the internet, dealers, always found success in running classified advertising for used cars. Even when they ran display ads, they typically dedicated a portion of the ad on the bottom to classified format for used cars. Well, now that the internet has come along, I don't think that dynamic has changed. Consequently, sites like Cars.com and Auto Trader generally represent the best form, the best venue for used car shoppers to shop for used cars in the format that they see, and that's volume, selection, and a classified format. So I think we all fairly understand the value of classified advertising sites like the ones that I mentioned. But what I've come to understand is that few dealers have even the most basic, minimal understanding of the dynamics of those sites. So let me explain what I mean. There are 3 technical terms that I would suggest to you, unless you understand, you have mastery of, and you manage, you really don't have any business spending a penny on a classified advertising site. And the first of these is what we call a search result page, or an SRP. The second one is what we call a VDP, a vehicle detail page. And the third is a conversion percentage of an SRP to a VDP. Let me introduce these concepts to you. If somebody goes onto a classified advertising site, they're typically prompted to type in their zip code and the type of car they want. So if they type in their zip code in your market and they typed in, let's just say, Chevy Tahoe, they might get 8 pages of Chevy Tahoes. On Cars.com, each page contains 50 cars. On Auto Trader, each one contains 25 cars. Let's assume that your vehicle's on page 5. Let's further assume that an internet shopper only looks at page 1, 2, 3, and 4. Up to that point, you don't get credited for what we call an SRP. You don't get credit for a search result page until and unless they get to page 5, that page that contains your vehicle as one of 25 or 50. If they get to that page, you get credit for an SRP. But up to that point, nothing of any value has occurred for your dealership for all the money that you paid. Nothing, and I mean zero. Nothing of value occurs for your dealership until and unless you get what's called a vehicle detail page, a VDP. So what is that? Well, if somebody examines all 25 or 50 vehicles on that page, but finds your car as one that is so closely aligned to their needs, interests, wants, and desires that they're willing to click on your car to the exclusion of all the other cars on that page, fill the entire screen with all the photos, descriptions, and information about your vehicle, spend a few moments considering, pondering, imagining that car for them, that's what's called a VDP. And until you get that moment with that shopper on the site, zero has happened for you for all the money that you paid to be on that site. So you see, VDPs are the money metric. But when you get a VDP, it didn't happen randomly. For crying out loud, about 1.5 million other cars were excluded in favor of yours. And the reason that happened is that the search engine has worked in connection with the mind containing the needs, wants, desires of the shopper to exclude all the other cars. Now, here's the next really fascinating piece of information that I discovered, is that there is a mathematical correlation between the number of VDPs the dealership gets and the number of retail cars they sell. If you gave me the VDPs of 100 dealerships and I added them up, I could tell you within 10% how many retail cars those 100 dealerships sold in that particular month. There is absolutely a mathematical correlation. The more VDPs your dealership gets, the more used cars it sells. And stop and think about it. I mean, when somebody excludes 1.5 million other cars on that site to spend a few moments thinking about, imagining, and pondering your vehicle, the more times that happens, the more time they show up on your doorstep, the more times they call your switchboard with highly qualified interest on a specific vehicle that you have in stock. Would I have to work hard to convince you that if I delivered 100 such people to your front door, you would sell 30 to 50 of them? You know you would. So that is the only experience for you as a dealer that classified advertising site is capable of producing. Okay? So now that you understand the importance of VDPs, what's the connection between the SRP and the VDP? Well, what I've come to understand is a benchmark, which you should expect on Auto Trader, is a minimum of a 3% conversion and roughly a 4% conversion on Cars.com. And the reason there's a slight difference between the two is that the sites work a little bit differently. They count them a little bit differently. But the point is, if you're spending money with these sites month after month and you don't know if you got any VDPs at all, or you don't know if you're converting at 1% or 4% or 5%, you are not in possession of the requisite information to have any idea if you're putting your money down the drain. These are measurements, minimal measurements that you have to have mastery and understanding of to justify spending any money on these sites, because VDPs are what matters. And the next point that I want to make to you about this strategy is that you have to turn your dealerships into VDP factories. The more VDPs you can generate, the more used cars you're going to sell. And by the way, I'm not having an internet strategy discussion here. I'm having a used car management discussion. Just happens to be a 21st century used car management discussion, but this is not internet strategy. This is basic 101 used car management strategy in the 21st century. So now that you understand what an SRP, a VDP, and a SRP to VDP conversion is, you understand the importance of the VDP. Now let me turn attention to strategies for turning your dealership into VDP factories. It starts with a misconception. The misconception is that you, the dealer, wrote a big check and sent it off to those guys, Cars.com and Auto Trader, and now you've done your job. It's time for them to do their job. That couldn't be further from the truth. When you send a check to those guys, all you've done is paid to get in the game. If you don't understand the rules of the game, if you're not good at playing by the rules of the game, you'd be better served by hanging on to your money. I mean, those sites work. What's not to work about a site when you have a gazillion sellers and a gazillion buyers coming together? But that's not to say that that site, that market, that rational marketplace, albeit virtual, works the same for every merchant. It certainly does not. And what determines how a marketplace favors or disfavors any given merchant are conditions that exist in that merchant's realm that they control. So let's talk about the things that you as the dealer control that, if done right, can absolutely turn your dealerships into VDP factories and big volume retail outlets. Well, the first strategy is to get more SRPs. And don't be confused, SRPs are not the money metric. VDPs are. But if we can get your dealership generating more SRPs and you're successful in converting them to VDPs, that's a pretty good start. Now, what I'm going to lay out for everyone is full of nuance, and I want to stress that it's full of nuance. And the time permitting today will only allow us to get to the high level. But your reps from both those companies, along with myself and my team, it's our job to educate you to the nuances. But to start to get to more SRPs, there are 3 decisions that you at the dealership make that drives the number of SRPs. The first is the placement decision. See, these sites will allow you to get more favorable placement if you spend extra money, and the key is not to spend the extra money every time it's offered. The key is to know when and where you should spend the extra money. But nevertheless, you at the dealership make the decision on placement. The second one is your pricing. I think you all understand that. The third factor that determines your SRP performance is the scarcity of your inventory. This is a concept that most dealerships don't understand, and let me explain what I mean. The scarcity concept addresses the question of to what extent are the cars that you have on your used car lot right now aligned or misaligned, as the case may be, with the types of cars that people are searching for on that site in your market this month. You'd be shocked. You'd be shocked if you learned that there are some months when you hand over those dollars to those companies where your inventory is hugely out of line. In other words, what you have on your lot, it doesn't look at all like the cars that are most frequently being searched. And on other months, it is highly aligned. You see, what people are searching for on these sites changes all the time, as does your inventory. So the alignment of the search requests in your cars is a critical piece of information for you to know, when you should buy that placement, when maybe you should be on that site or not being on that site. And both of these companies will report that to you. In the case of Auto Trader, they report it to you in a metric called demand index. But this is yet another factor that you have to control, and that is to be sure that you have cars on your lot that are reasonably well aligned to what people are searching for on that site. If you don't, you better get those types of cars there, or perhaps maybe even take a hiatus on the site. But suffice it to say that if you make the correct placement decisions, you price properly, and you have the right inventory measured by the demand index or scarcity, suffice it to say you will get more than your share of SRPs at the expense of your competitors. But again, keep in mind SRPs are not the money metric, it's VDPs. So what determines how well a dealership converts SRPs into VDPs? Well, on Auto Trader, there are only 4 factors, and on Cars.com, there's 3. And if you can't convert or are not converting at the proper rate, it cannot be for any other reason other than misuse of these 4 factors. The first is a little thumbnail photo. Now, I have to ask you, for all the money that you guys spend as dealers to get your cars on these sites, how many of you can actually say that you give thought, conscious attention to what vehicle shot of the many that you take goes in the first slot? Because the first shot is the one that ends up on the SRP page, and to be sure, when you take multiple photos of your car, there are going to be some that can easily be identified as the most compelling. But very few, if any, dealerships actually give that any attention. Randomly, the first one in the series goes to the SRP page. And if you're not willing to take conscious, focus on that little piece of information, then honestly, you're not willing to play the game to justify the investment that you make on these sites. And it brings a tear to your eye. If you look at page after page of cars on these sites, you quickly realize that most dealerships don't give a lick of thought to this. And what's the point of getting your cars to the SRP page if you can't get to the VDP page? So that's the first of 4 factors you can control. The second one is what I call the photo bait. Around the little thumbnail photo on the SRP page, there are words that says to the shopper what they would get if they clicked on your car versus the other cars on the page. It says how many other photos are there and whether or not there's video. And every single piece of evidence suggests that the more goodies there are in terms of photos and images and video down on that VDP page, the more times people will do it. And I understand that you all have to figure out a place to draw a line on expenses, but this is not it. If you're willing to spend the money to get your cars to these SRP pages, but you're not willing to take the maximum number of shots, and good quality ones at that, I might add, then again, you're not willing to play by the rules of this market. You ought not to do it at all. So, the photo bait, the words that says to the shopper, here, click here because you'll get lots of goodies in terms of images if you click. The third thing is the price. You all tend to understand that. The fourth thing is unique to Auto Trader, and that is that on the SRP page, they allow you to put an abbreviated description of the vehicle. Depending on what package you buy from them, it's either 150 to 250 characters in length. And I would suggest to you that this is some of the most valuable, precious frontline used car real estate you own. And for most dealers, they do nothing to merchandise their front line on these sellers' notes. They let the site take care of it for them. And if you allow that to happen, they will take simply the first 150 characters or 250 characters of your description and plop it in there. And in many cases, that's a simple VIN decode. So if you go through page after page of cars on the site and you look at all the cars that are trying to get people to click for VDPs off the SRP page, describing their vehicles with really compelling differentiating equipment like automatic transmission, power steering, power brakes, it wants to bring a tear to your eye. I mean, you guys are spending dearly hard-earned money and just squandering it and willing to allow that to happen. And you guys have been at this medium for the better part of a decade. You spent millions of dollars to date on it, and yet these factors that you can control, that you must control to get to the VDP, the only experience that possibly could serve you any value, you guys are completely, not completely, and it's getting better, but largely, I should say, you know, these are items that are too unimportant for you to be concerned about, and you can't do that anymore. You don't have any money to waste. Okay, so now that you all understand what the SRP, VDP conversion means, you understand how important it is to your success, and you understand at a high level, you know, strategies that you can and are responsible for executing to get more SRPs and ultimately more VDPs, now is where it gets really fascinating. You know, what I want to tell you, and I often use the analogy between managing your vehicles and inventory like they're your children. And, you know, being a good parent is not treating all your kids the same. Being a good parent is knowing what each one of your children needs and giving them what that child needs. So, you know, all of us in the car business understand the importance of our time with our family. And being there, you know, whether it be for breakfast or for dinner, but being there. And the point of having breakfast or dinner or you're being there with your kids is the ability to look into their little faces, their eyes, their souls, if you can see it, and ask yourself, what's up with this one? What does it need? Well, the problem with kids is that they don't often tell you what they need, or they don't often tell you properly what they need, and that's the art, that's the challenge of being a good parent. You got to sort of read it, you have to intuit it, and you got to get it right, and you got to deliver what they need. Okay, but if you take that same analogy of your kids to your cars, the beautiful thing about your cars is that they are telling you exactly what they need. But the problem is for us in the industry, we haven't been listening. We haven't been there for breakfast or dinner. And if we were, we don't understand the language that they're speaking to us. But in fact, they are speaking to us in precision, exactly what they need. And let me now explain how that works. On this screen, I'm going to show you 3 cars that are emblematic or symptomatic of cars that are in your inventory right now, I can assure you. And let me demonstrate how clearly these vehicles are talking to us. This first car is this Land Cruiser. And because I have dinner with my cars every day, I understand very well that with 15 days in inventory, this first Land Cruiser has gotten 240 SRPs. I understand that's about right. That's what I would expect. And further, it's gotten 8 VDPs, which is a 3% conversion. So if this is one of my children, it bounces out of bed, it hits the breakfast table, I look into his soul and I say, you know what, pal, you're on track, go to school. But next comes its little sister to the breakfast table, and I look at what she's telling me, and she's telling me that she's gotten twice as many SRPs, twice as many looks as I would expect a car to have after 15 days, but she's only gotten 10 VDPs, which is a 1.8% conversion. There's something wrong with this car. There's something wrong with this child. Can I see it? Yeah, I can see it. She's getting a lot of looks, but she's not getting asked out. Okay, so what does this tell me about this one? Well, it gives me a cue for stocking that 2002 BMWs are being highly searched in my market on that site. It just might be great inventory. But the fact that it's only got 1.8% conversion tells me there's something wrong. And what could be wrong? The only things that can be wrong are those 4 things. Those 4 things I told you. And to be sure, if you were willing to go to the site and look at the thumbnail photo, look at the photo bait, look at the price, look at the seller's notes, there's no question you would find out what's wrong. Because this is a marketplace, a virtual marketplace. It acts rationally, and cars, you know, get on average 3% conversions. And if this one's only getting 1.8, it can only be as a result of one or a combination of those 4 reasons. Just go fix it. And if you don't fix it, you're spending money to inventory a car and advertise it, and it's likely going nowhere on you. Third kid that bounces out of bed and hits the table says to me yet a different story. It's only got 90 searches, this Commander. So once again, from a stocking standpoint, it's giving me a cue that this might not be a car that is highly aligned this month in my market for that site shoppers. But on the other hand, this particular car's got 50 VDPs, which is a 55% conversion. No car should ever get a 55% conversion factor. If this one's telling me that he's getting a 55 conversion factor, what do you think the problem might be? The price is going to be too low. And unfortunately, probably before you have a chance to rectify it, the odds are that this car is going to be sold and you will left money on the table. So these are just 3 examples of the way that your cars every day are speaking to you. But the question is, are you there? Are you listening to them? Do you understand what they're telling you? And do you understand how to fix them? But the reality is that they're all talking clearly, and it's all fixable. And what I've come to understand is that dealers who have breakfast with their cars in this way, they understand the language, they're tuned in, they know what to do about it, absolutely drive VDPs like crazy, and the volume of customers that come to their showroom to buy cars will change dramatically. So really critical strategy about making it happen on the internet. Now, Susan, how much time do we have left?
About 15 minutes.
Okay. Where are we headed as an industry? You know, in this highly margin compressed environment where more and more dealers maybe are getting it, doing it right, is there a slippery slope here where there's going to be a race to the bottom and none of us can make any money? Well, the answer is absolutely not. And the way that we can be sure of that is we can look to other industries, other markets that have been and continue to be efficient, much more efficient than ours. You can look at the Board of Trade. You can look at the Commodities Exchange. You can look at the option exchanges. Arguably, these are some of the most efficient, rational marketplaces in the world where buyers and sellers have exactly the same information at about exactly the same moment. Is there a race to the bottom in those marketplaces and no one ever makes any money? They all go out of business? Never. There are always winners and losers. But what's important for us to recognize, because we have a market of ever greater efficiency, are the characteristics that separate the winners from the losers in these most efficient markets. And primarily there are 2. And the first one is the ability of the winners in these efficient markets to perceive and to move directly to what's called the margin price. In a trader's world, they call it the margin price. You see, any product in any market at any moment will have a price at which it will transact. The trader calls that the margin price. An economist calls it the equilibrium price. But suffice it to say, every product in every market at any moment has such a price point. So the first characteristic of the winners, sellers in the most efficient markets are those that can see that margin price and are willing to move to it right away. And this is where a lot of dealers lose it, because even if they can see it, they don't want to move to it right away. They want to try, you know, selling it, marketing it up here for a while, then up here, and maybe eventually stumble upon it or move to it. But if you're going to wait to move to that margin price, you've missed the opportunity, you missed the moment. You have to be able to see it, identify it, and move to it right away. Now, the second characteristic comes with a little bit of tough news, and that is that that margin price will most often yield a fairly minimal profit. Okay? Now, what would happen if too many other sellers one day woke up and said, hey, I can see that margin price, and I'll move to it right now? Well, for sure, that margin price would go down. And as it goes down, what it does 100% of the time is that it systematically excludes or eliminates or weeds out the least efficient sellers. The least efficient sellers, the ones that have the highest costs, sloppiest operations, say, oh my God, I can't make any money here. I'm going to go do something different. The soybean trader might go and try trading corn. The used car dealer who can't make any money on compact cars might say, hey, I'll try some compact SUVs. Ultimately, some dealers might say, hey, I can't make any money with this dealership. I'll try turning it into a storage facility. But that's exactly what happens systematically. In order from least to most efficient, they exit. Now, the good news is that once those sellers of less efficiency, operational efficiency, begin to exit, guess what happens to that margin price? Starts to go back up. And you want to know something? Those dealers that are most efficient, those sellers that are most efficient, that can bear it out at the bottom, sometimes even at a negative margin, but they can bear it out at the bottom, when that margin price starts to rise, it doesn't have to rise very much at all before they start making lots of money because they are so operationally efficient. And once that margin price goes up too high, once again, it starts attracting the least efficient operators again, and that process repeats itself. So to be sure to position yourself in the face of this very difficult market for long-term viability, I remind you to pay attention to two characteristics. Number one, perceive and be willing to move directly to the margin price, and number two, become very operationally efficient. Now, on the front of being operationally efficient, just a couple warnings for you guys. Over the past 2 years, as a result of the economic downturn, you guys have done one heck of a job cutting your expenses to the bone. No question about it. But I want to tell you something that all the eternal optimist car dealer needs to have is a little bit of hope and optimism before we're spreading our wings again. I mean, hope springs eternal for the car dealer. If you don't have that, optimistic bent, it's hard to imagine that you're a car dealer. And what we all know is that we will get sloppy from an expense control standpoint, with just the least bit of prosperity. And we are beginning to see an economic recovery, but I want to give you all a really big warning. I believe that the economic recovery that we're beginning to experience is going to be short-lived. Now, I hope I'm wrong, and if I'm wrong, I don't think I will have served you incorrectly with this advice. But you see, the reason that we're experiencing a recovery of some sort is because of our country's monetary policy. We've been, the Federal Reserve has been very generous with the money supply. It keeps putting money out there, huge amount of money is being put into the economy through this quantitative easing strategy. And what happens once you get enough money pumped into the economy and that money starts to move around, ironically, they call that velocity of the money, invariably as you get inflation. Inflation's the #1 enemy to an economy, and the only weapon that the government has to fight inflation is interest rates. And for the most part, all of us have been lulled to sleep over the past decade because money's been very cheap. But I fear that right around the corner is inflation and higher interest rates. So, one of the things as dealers that we really haven't had to give a lot of thought to for the past decade or so is the cost of money. The availability of it, yes, but the cost of money, no. So I guess my advice for long-term operational efficiency would be, to think very hard about your cash conservation. Pay down, pay down, pay down, or lock in, lock in, lock in as long as you can low fixed-term interest rates as while they're long, because I happen to have been in the car business when prime rate went to 21%. And I'm not saying that's going to happen again, but it could. But what I am confident of is that we are beginning to, and we will continue to get inflation. The government will have no choice but to raise interest rates. And unfortunately, dealers depend on a lot of credit, and consequently, they have a lot of exposure to interest rate risk. So I would give you a warning on that. But if you can keep your costs contained, if you can really watch the credit risk that I'm concerned about and continue to work on operational efficiency, I think that these will be the hallmarks of the winners in the economy of the future. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions. Susan?
Okay, so we have several questions from Michael Baker, who is no longer on the presentation. His first question was, Dale, recommendations upon the loss of a franchise to utilizing the historic database of sales when franchise is gone.
Well, I don't know that I'm an expert on database management or marketing, but there obviously is a big opportunity there. And Mike, I understand, the question. I understand the circumstances, but I would say that if you can't use it, sell it. One of the two, but to be sure, it's quite a big asset. Next question.
Also from Michael, is your aging post-reconditioning?
No, as dealers begin to adopt and experience the velocity method of management, what becomes abundantly clear is the speed of the operation, the speed from the front line, or excuse me, the speed from the acquisition to the front line, both virtual and physical. And I think that any dealer that doesn't want to start the clock until the car is through the reconditioning process is essentially burying their head in the sand to a huge area of inefficiency. And there's a guy who I think might be participating in this seminar. He's one of the most brilliant used car operators, or dealership operators that I know at Edmark Chevrolet, John Chalfant. And I know that John spends a majority of his time just knocking down constraints and barriers to the whole speed and throughput of the operation. And that really is the that's maybe the final frontier of velocity management, because I often refer to the reconditioning process as the final frontier of the old school used car management. Next question.
Also from Michael, does this model hold true for market metros such as New York City, Los Angeles versus rural and radius of pricing and market reach?
Without question. I tell you, I have enough experience now where I've seen the velocity model work in every market, geographically, size, shape, configuration. The Internet's the Internet, people are the people, and the market's the market. It is absolutely not dependent whatsoever. Are there nuances to operating in big versus small, city versus rural markets? Of course there are. But the dynamic of marketplaces are the same.
Okay, let's see, next question from Michael also. Number of minimum photos.
Good thing Michael attended.
There's more questions. Let's see, number of minimum photos seems to be competitive threshold.
Yeah, and let me tell you, I don't.
Dale?
Fairly cold, sterile medium.
Okay, hold on. We missed some of your. You cut out there for a moment. So start.
Yeah, I don't know what the right number is. All I know is that the Internet is a cold, sterile medium, and buying a car should be an emotional experience. So the more images and the better quality you can put there, the better.
Okay, and then he made a comment. He did have a question about SRPs, but he says thanks for the elaboration on SRPs. Okay. Let's see, from Ozzy Gonzalez. We have all heard that there is a correlation between VDPs and actual cars sold at dealerships. I had also heard that there is an equation/formula that gives you a potential of influenced cars sold off VDPs, all factors considered equal. I've heard that it's either 0.003 or 0.004 multiplied by your total VDPs. If this is true, can you give us the correct formula?
Yeah, let me tell you, first of all, this is liable not to apply to any given dealership. But if you took 100 dealerships together, as I mentioned, add up their VDPs and add up their sales, the formula will work. So I've been reluctant to speak publicly. I will today as to what the number is, but don't believe that if you apply this to your numbers, it doesn't work. Don't believe it's invalid. It just isn't consistently valid enough to stand the test on every single dealership. But if you put a bunch of dealerships together, you find that it's very valid. And the back of the envelope map that I use is 0.0088. 0.008, so slightly less than 1%. If you apply that to 10 or 100 dealerships, you'll come up very close to their combined sales. But, you really ought not to get hung up on what the percentage is. What you ought to get hung up on the fact is that the more VDPs, the more sales. The more VDPs, the more sales. And if you focus and operate your dealerships as if they're VDP factories, you'll win in this game.
Okay, the next question comes from Chad Tussman.
Hey, Chad.
Dale, do you have an average SRP per day in mind that a car should get? I'm sure it depends on our monthly SRPs versus total SRPs over days in month/number of cars in stock.
Yeah, let me tell you, I'm really reluctant on that one for two reasons. Number one, I'm not sure that my knowledge is broad enough, and I do know that it varies from market to market and month to month. But one thing I can tell all of you is that these SRP and VDP metrics are available to you on both the back end of Cars.com and Auto Trader. And it doesn't take you long, like maybe a week, of looking at it before you start understanding for your market, for your month, what cars are getting after a week, after 2 weeks, after 3 weeks. So it's so easy to get your head calibrated around it. But I know that the answer varies considerably from market to market, month to month, and I'm not familiar enough with it to come out with a number that's reliable. But when you start to look at it over just as short of a period of a week or two at your dealership, it becomes very obvious what cars are overperforming versus underperforming.
Okay, from Marianne Chanda, what is the benchmark for VDPs to sales? How many VDPs does it take, generally speaking, to sell a car?
Yeah, well, that's sort of the metric that I just spoke about, that 0.008. But again, I give that to you guys with the greatest amount of caution that it is not precise enough that I could represent to you that it will work for your dealership all the time. But if you put a bunch of dealerships together, it works.
Okay, from Rich Page, Dale, although this webinar is not about stocking, can you give some friends of mine in Cincinnati some insight on what a max cost to market might be?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it constantly varies. But what I say today is if your cost to market, if your car is ready to go on the front line, and I'm talking about a combination of certified and non-certified cars, if it exceeds 84% cost to market, I'm concerned that for what you have to do to sell a car, to price the car to sell it, I'm concerned that you won't be satisfied with your result. So and again, to be clear, there are three factors that go into cost of market. Number one, what you paid to get the car. Number two, the money you spent to recondition it. Number three, the pack. But looking at several thousand dealers' cost of markets all the time, with a combination of all sorts of different packing practices and reconditioning practices, what I see today as a high end for my comfort is about 83, 84%. And invariably, as your cars age, that goes up because your market price goes down. But on average, 84% is is the top end of my comfort level.
Okay, and then I believe the next person, Tim Felsky, is from the Great North. I asked Dale this the last time I saw him speak, but how is vAuto coming along in Canada?
We're in Canada. Trader Canada is our sales rep. vAuto USA is doing the performance, post-sale, ongoing performance management support for the dealers. But if you contact your Trader Canada rep, we're in market, including a complete French version along with support and performance management in French.
Next question comes from Chris Hurd. He says, I've never seen individual unit SRP and VDP numbers. Where do you get this information?
Chris, you've never looked on the back end of AutoTraderCars.com in the right place. It's there. We also have it in the vAuto application. So get it, find it, make a religion out of having meals with your cars, so to speak.
And the next question comes from Tom Stegman. Any good references for setting up an indoor photo area?
Well, first of all, you should never take photographic advice from a blind guy. That would be my first piece of advice to you. But in all seriousness, I don't have any particular expertise in this. But you know what I would do? I'd find the local photographer in your town, the one that takes studio shots of families, and I would invite the guy down, give him a free oil change, and just talk to him a little bit about lighting. I know that has a lot to do with it, and sort of background colors and that sort of thing. I mean, I don't think you have to spend a lot of money, nor do I think you have to be a photographic rocket scientist to take decent photos. I know that lighting has a lot to do with it. In a controlled environment definitely helps, but it's not that difficult to do, but it's terribly important to do.
Okay, from Sheriff Dimitri, reconditioning personnel question. Dedicated used car technicians are running through entire service department.
Well, I think the answer to that is liable to vary from operation to operation based on a number of different unique factors. But let me just say this. What I would do is I would recognize the speed of your reconditioning and the quality, but the speed of your reconditioning process to be absolutely paramount to the profitability of the operation. And again, I get frustrated that dealers complain about the lack of profitability of used cars, and they don't tend to these matters, these conditions like speed of reconditioning and cost to market and market day supply. These are the factors, these are the conditions that allow for profitability. So, I don't know the answer is going to be consistent whether you have dedicated folks or leverage the other techs, but just figure it out what's right for yours and be ever so conscious about rapid reconditioning. And there are tools out there now. There's a tool out there called Rapid Recon. And, these are solutions that are putting the emphasis in the right place.
Okay, from John Fogg. As a dealer that takes very few trades, having to acquire vehicles from auctions, today's prices are much higher than current market retail. Help.
Well, John, I understand that if you're taking fewer trades because of your new car franchise and you got to buy more, you are likely to have a higher cost to market. But I want to tell you something, that there is a strategy to be used to mitigate the pressure of paying too much money. And we teach classes on that, and I post on my blog when we teach classes. But John, I feel your pain. I understand your question. And if you contact me separately, let me help you with that. There are strategies. There's no magic dust here, but there are strategies to find cars that can be purchased for more reasonable money. And it's a longer discussion, and I am happy to help. I owe it to you.
Okay, Chad Tussman would like to thank you for your help.
Thanks, Chad. Appreciate it.
From Tom Stegman, have you seen a decline in VDPs to SRPs in the last few months overall? Ours have declined, and we have not been able to identify any changes in our processes.
Yeah, I always wonder about that, and you know, with my association with Auto Trader, I think that I can and I should reconfirm that 3% conversion. I wonder about that too, Tom. And let me make a commitment to everyone that I will be better informed on an ongoing basis as to what the actual proper benchmark is. Has it come down a little bit? I'm not sure, but I'll get that information. I'll begin to communicate reliably and consistently to the market as to whether you should be converting at 3% or 2.8 or 3.2 based on averages. So thank you for that prompt.
Okay, from Phil McDonald, should we see a relationship between MDS and VDP percentage?
Yeah, good question. When I first started talking to Auto Trader, that was one of Chip Harry's first questions. What is the correlation between market day supply and VDPs? And let me tell you that I found, or we found, a correlation that was in the high 60% range. In other words, cars that were in the top segment of VDP attainment tended to be lower market day supplies. But 66 or 67% correlation, in my mind, still leaves a lot of room for error. And in other words, you can still have a good VDP conversion on a high market day supply if you control those four factors correctly. So, you know, there is overlap, but it's not to be assumed that it's one-to-one.
This comes from Roy Galladay. He simply says, thank you, very informative.
Thank you, Roy.
From John Watkins, if 84% is a high end for cost to market, is there a low end that might suggest you're missing trades?
Yeah, great question. You know, I do believe that if you're below 80%, you're probably missing opportunities to trade or to buy. And also keep in mind, for those of you that use the metric, I often discount the cost to market in the first 15 days because, you know, I'm always suspect of the fact that internal ROs haven't gotten posted to the unit. So I don't really consider the first 15 days cost to market in the overall 84% equation. So when I see, you know, cost to markets in the 70% range, high 70% range, it's normally in the first 15 days.
Okay, from Rich Page, with your new Auto Trader affiliation, is there anything new coming to vAuto or Auto Trader?
Oh my goodness, yes. You know, we have the luxury, the honor, the privilege of putting this inventory management tool squarely between Manheim and Auto Trader. I mean, literally the preeminent wholesale marketplace for automobiles and the preeminent retail marketplace. And if I can't connect those dots, and if I can't bring new knowledge and information and functionality that makes your life easier and more profitable, you guys should shoot me. And I won't let that happen. I'm so hard at work at it. And I have to tell you, my spirit, my enthusiasm for what I do has never been higher because I have a huge sandbox with all the coolest toys, and I know exactly what to do with them, and I'm working on them. But, you know, just to give you a little glimpse, you know, one of the things that I've done is to bring these SRPs and VDPs into the vAuto tool, bring them to the forefront of your stocking or your pricing and soon your stocking decisions. I ought to be able to tell you when you think about what cars you want to put in your inventory, which cars are getting the highest VDPs in your market, at what price. And you should know, not have to guess, where to price the car to get the maximum number of VDPs. These are some of the things I'm working on. Also, one of the greatest pains in the industry today is sourcing the right cars for the right money. With you know, opportunities that Manheim is offering me, I'll have the ability to build a buy list based on your market, your needs, your price points, show you where the cars are, show you what you can bid up to without you having to lift a finger. I'll develop that functionality for you. So I will take this to yet another level with these assets that I have, and I'm working very hard on them right now. But you'll start to see those things, come in earnest the second half of this year. So hang tight. We're going to take it to another level.
Okay, and Rich Page commented, thanks, Dale, always great.
Thank you, Rich.
And our last question comes from Mitch Roseberry, and there were a few similar ones to this. Is there any way to hear the section about listening to our kids again? I missed that section and really want to hear the info. How do I hear it again?
Good question. We are recording this session, Susan?
I do have it under record, yes.
Okay, we're recording this session. We'll put it up on our website at vAuto.com. It will probably take a few days. And for any of you, let me just say this, whether I do business with you or not, this stuff that I've talked to you about VDPs and SRPs are so critical to your success. I'm pleased, without any obligation on your part or sense of commitment to do business with me, I'm pleased to spend as much time with you guys as you'd like, working through these issues and the nuances, and there are plenty of nuances. But I also want to tell you that your Cars.com and Auto Trader reps today are better prepared, better trained to help you guys understand this stuff and be good at it than ever. So I would encourage all of you to really reach out to those reps and get the knowledge or call me.
And one comment from John Douglas, always a pleasure, thank you.
Okay, John, thank you so much. And everyone participating, thank you, and we'll look forward to more seminars. And I'll put on my blog dates and subjects of future seminars. So thank you all for participating. Bye-bye.